This is Matt Jones with Concordia University in Irvine, and I'm talking today about torque and power and angular force concerning the overhead squat. Um, when it comes to the overhead squat, since it's stability based, there's not a lot of torque or angular force or power in that matter, for that matter. Um, the barbell's in a fixed position overhead, so since torque implies twisting or rotation, there is none. Um, Rotation at the hips would mean that knees are caving in. You got valgus or extreme varus where the knees are caving out. That would be internal and external rotation. That would indicate a poor squat. Rotation at the shoulders would indicate a lack of stability, so you wouldn't want that. However, if we were to look at what we use the overhead squat to progress to, which would be a snatch, there's a great deal of torque and angular force in that you're moving a bar from the floor overhead, and the shoulders, boom, are catching the bar violently overhead. I mean, if we look at that shoulder joint there's a ton of torque and angular force there. And considering angular force adheres to Newton's first law, this is where the overhead squat becomes an important teaching tool, in that if, we get that bar moving, but we don't have adequate upper back strength and stability to stop that bar, it's going to keep going, and we're going to rip our shoulder apart. So that's why the overhead squat is so valuable. It adequately assesses and develops upper back strength. Some factors affecting torque are the amount of force, the angle of the force, and the length of the moment arm. Length of moment arm is easy. Taller athletes are going to struggle. That bar gets so much further away from their body. That's why I don't that's why I don't snatch with my volleyball athletes. Those guys have really long levers. And that puts them at a disadvantage in terms of Olympic lifting and whatnot. But that's another conversation. Angle of force, bar position. If the bar is in an incorrect position, then we're going to have angular force acting in either direction, right? In terms of the overhead squat, if the bar's too far back, well, now we got angular force acting that way, right? If it's too far forward, now we got angular force coming down, and we don't want that. We want the bar in a stable position overhead. And the amount of force in the overhead squat, it's just the barbell or weight on the bar. In terms of like the snatch, it could be much greater amount of force in that. It's the force of the barbell and the force generated by the athlete as well. Common errors in the overhead squat simply indicate weakness or dysfunction in movement. And specifically Sealbon O'Connor did a study, and what they found was a lack of core stability leads to injury in the lower extremities. And so that's a great tool to have as a coach. If you can have an assessment that will predict whether or not your athlete's going to get hurt, specifically, in the lower extremities, well, that allows you to individualize programming and take it in a case-by-case basis, in that say, okay, this athlete needs a little bit more core strength, they're at risk of getting injured. Again, looking at power and work and energy, in terms of the overhead squat, there shouldn't be any power, right? This is not a movement that you want done quickly. Work, there's no displacement, there's no bar displacement. The bar starts overhead, it finishes overhead, or at least it should. In terms of energy, that's just the capacity of the athlete. Can they perform this movement? So none of those apply very well to the overhead squat. But again, if we progressed it and we looked at the snatch, now all of these are extremely relevant. Power is needed in order to move the bar overhead. Taller athletes, like I said, are going to have a harder time snatching because of the displacement, right? Now you're bringing a bar from the floor up overhead. There's a great deal of bar displacement, right? So you're performing much more work. Energy is the same, right? It's capacity for movement, muscular strength, muscular power, muscle mass. What capacity does this athlete have to generate force? Common errors here would be the torso dropping in the overhead squat, right? If we're here, we start to get that dip a little bit. That's going to affect work in the sense that might lead to some bar displacement in that the bar is not going to finish where it started. So the athlete's performing more work. You want very little bar displacement in the overhead squat. You want that bar path to be, almost zero. But again, if we progress this to the snatch, no triple extension, no power. You're probably gonna get that bar overhead. Bar travels away from your body. You're doing much more work. If it's a heavy bar, probably didn't get that overhead either. Lack of muscle mass, lack of technique, lack of power, lack of strength. It's all going to affect your energy and your capacity to do the movement. Interesting research I found here was that displacement of the feet during specifically the drop phase in elite level lifters, when they express rearward displacement of the feet, they had greater success in lifting the weight. And I would bet that has something to do with like being able to stabilize the bar, getting underneath the bar. If your feet move backwards as opposed to forwards with the bar traveling behind you. But I thought that was an interesting concept in terms of looking at displacement. Displacement of the feet as opposed to just the bar. As far as collisions, overhead squat's a stability-based movement. There's not a lot of collision. There shouldn't be a lot of collision going on. But again, you progress this to a snatch, there's a ton of collision. The catch phase is a huge collision affecting the low back, the hips, knees, ankles, shoulders. Joint mobility, strength in, increased range of motion, upper back strength, core strength. Those all must be considered. Greg Calhoun saw that injury rates and the profiles of elite competitive weightlifters. He found that injury with elite weightlifters, specifically in the snatch, that was more from overuse than from one giant collision. Yeah, you have those freak injuries, but generally it was from constant collisions over and over and over from performing these movements repetitively. So there's a great deal of collision when you progress this to the snatch as opposed to the overhead squat. So that's something that coaches should be looking for, in using these movements with athletes. You don't want to overuse them. We don't need them to get hurt in the weight room. We need them fresh to be on the field. And that is my presentation this evening on the torque and power in the overhead squat. Thank you.